1. Shock hope, the courtroom froze. Judge Beryl Howell's gavel slammed down, her voice cutting like steel. Representative Crockett, you are out of order. I am issuing a sanction. The sound echoed through the chamber, sharp and final, as if she had just dropped a stone into still water. A ripple of gasps filled the room, each one carrying the weight of disbelief. Reporters shifted in their seats, pins scratching furiously, cameras clicking like a swarm of locusts ready to capture the spectacle in that instant. The balance of power tilted. Howell, cloaked in the authority of her robe, projected the confidence of someone who had silenced countless voices before. To her, this was another routine display of control, another chance to remind everyone that her word was law. The sanction wasn't just a reprimand. It was a dagger aimed at Crockett's credibility, a scarlet letter meant to haunt her future. But the real drama wasn't in Howell's declaration. It was in the way the room responded. Some heads turned in quiet satisfaction, their smirks revealing how eager they were to see Crockett fall. Others looked stunned, unsettled, as though the air had been stolen from their lungs. For the millions who would watch this clip, it wasn't simply a procedural rebuke. It was the image of power, cold, unyielding, trying to crush a woman who had dared to speak her mind. Crockett sat still, her eyes fixed on Howell. No raised voice, no flustered panic, no sign of retreat. Just a silence that seemed to grow louder with every passing second. And in that silence, a new tension coiled through the room. Would she fold beneath the weight of the gavel, or would she rise? Because everyone watching knew what was really at stake. It wasn't just about courtroom protocol. It was about whether truth could survive in a place built on intimidation. It was about whether dignity could endure in the face of power that thrived on humiliation. Howell had made her move, confident it would stand as the final word. But beneath that stillness, something far more explosive was already taking shape, and no one in that room was prepared for the way Crockett would respond next. 2. Raise the stakes. Why did this moment matter so much? Because it wasn't just about a gavel striking wood or a judge scolding an elected official. It was about two powerful symbols colliding in front of the nation's eyes. On one side sat Judge Beryl Howell, long known for her iron grip over her courtroom, a figure whose rulings carried a reputation for being unflinching, even ruthless. On the other side sat Jasmine Crockett, a freshman representative who had rapidly transformed into one of Congress's most talked-about rising stars. This wasn't just a disciplinary spat. It was a collision of reputations, power, and futures. For Howell, maintaining control wasn't merely a matter of habit, it was her brand. Court watchers often described her as unyielding, the kind of judge who brooked no nonsense, who prided herself on reigning in those who dared to test her boundaries. She thrived on order, on dominance, on reminding all who entered her courtroom that she was the final arbiter. And in most cases, that reputation went unchallenged. Few had the confidence or the courage to stare her down. Crockett, however, wasn't most people. In just a short time on the national stage, she had already proven herself to be more than another face in Washington. With her sharp legal background, unapologetic fire, and willingness to say what others wouldn't, she had carved out a place as a voice for those too often silenced. She was becoming a symbol for younger Americans, for women, for immigrants and communities of color who saw in her a reflection of themselves, a refusal to shrink when confronted with raw power. That's why the stakes in this clash rose far beyond the four walls of the courtroom. The media had been circling for days, framing the narrative with headlines dripping with anticipation. Crockett in hot water with federal judge, rising representative faces sanction drama. Can Crockett survive Howell's wrath? These weren't neutral reports. They were teasers, building suspense for a national audience eager to see if the fiery congresswoman would bend or break. And here's the thing about sanctions. To outsiders, they may sound like dry, procedural reprimands, buried in legal jargon and paperwork. But in the realm of politics, a sanction carries the stench of scandal. It sticks. It stains. It becomes the headline your opponents throw in your face, the shadow that follows you long after the gavel's echo fades. For Howell, it may have seemed like a neat way to put Crockett in her place. But for Crockett, it was nothing less than an existential threat to her career and credibility. The chamber knew it. The press knew it. And soon, the entire nation would know it. Because this wasn't just a skirmish over court rules, it was an attempted silencing. It was the system, armored in black robes and procedural jargon, trying to cage a voice that had grown too powerful to ignore. In that moment, the storyline shifted. This was no longer about whether Crockett had spoken out of turn. It was about whether dignity and truth could survive a direct collision with institutional power. Millions who watched later didn't just see a sanction attempt. They saw an establishment figure trying to remind a young, rising leader of her place. And that's when the clash shifted from a legal proceeding into a historic showdown. 3. Antagonist backstory. To understand the drama of that day, you have to understand the figure at the center of it, Judge Beryl Howell. In the world of law, her name carries weight, equal parts respect and fear. She has been described as brilliant, methodical, and fiercely independent, but also as domineering, harsh, and intolerant of those who refuse to bend under her authority. For decades, Howell built her reputation as the kind of judge who would brook no nonsense. Her courtroom was her kingdom, her gavel her scepter. When she spoke, lawyers listened, and when she ruled, her word carried the aura of finality. But with that aura came something darker, an edge of arrogance that critics have never ignored. Howell was not the type to question whether her strictness ever slipped into intimidation. To her, order was everything. Fairness often seemed secondary to control. Those who challenged her style soon learned the cost. Rebukes that cut deep, rulings that reminded them she wasn't afraid to flex her institutional power. Over the years, stories piled up. Attorneys whispered of her sharp tongue and unforgiving demeanor. Reporters recalled cases where Howell's withering remarks became as memorable as the verdicts themselves. She cultivated an image of impartial authority, yes, but behind that image lurked a figure who often seemed more interested in maintaining dominance than in engaging in dialogue. And in today's political climate, that distinction matters. A courtroom is supposed to be a forum for truth, for evidence, for the careful weighing of facts. But in Howell's courtroom, truth often felt like it came second to tone, to deference, to submission. Those who challenged her authority weren't simply opponents in a legal proceeding. They were threats to her command. This is the persona Howell carried into the day she clashed with Jasmine Crockett. Cloaked in her black robe, she embodied the old guard, the establishment's deep instinct to control. To her, Crockett wasn't just an outspoken representative. She was a challenge to the very hierarchy Howell had spent her career defending. And in Howell's eyes, hierarchy must always be preserved. Contrast that with Crockett, who represented something Howell had little patience for: disruption. Crockett's presence in the courtroom wasn't timid. It was unapologetic. She had the audacity to be young, to be fiery, to be unafraid of calling power to account. Where Howell leaned on intimidation, Crockett leaned on clarity. Where Howell valued rigid order, Crockett embodied a restless pursuit of truth. The collision was inevitable. Howell's persona as the unshakable enforcer met Crockett's refusal to be silenced. And here's the irony. The very thing that made Howell respected in legal circles, her refusal to yield, was the same quality that would cast her as the antagonist in this story, because outside the cloistered walls of the judiciary, the audience watching from across the nation didn't see a noble guardian of order. They saw an authority figure flexing her power to put a rising leader back in her place. They saw the imbalance, the weight of the robe being used not as a shield of justice, but as a weapon of suppression. And in that contrast, Howell's arrogance came into sharper focus. She had faced countless lawyers, countless defendants, countless officials. She had ruled against giants and scolded the unprepared. She thought she knew how to handle this moment too. With a slam of the gavel and the cold sting of a sanction, she expected submission, but Howell underestimated one thing: Jasmine Crockett's fire. 4. Protagonist backstory. To grasp why Jasmine Crockett's response electrified that courtroom, you have to understand where she came from. Because her story isn't just one of political ascent, it's one of resilience forged in fire. Crockett wasn't born into privilege. She wasn't raised with a silver spoon or an inherited name that opened doors. Her story is rooted in grit, in the lessons of working-class struggle, in the kind of lived experience that no Ivy League seminar could ever replicate. From the beginning, Crockett understood that the system wasn't built with people like her in mind. She grew up surrounded by the reality that for some Americans, Justice isn't guaranteed, it's a fight. That awareness shaped her long before she set foot in a courtroom or held public office. It sharpened her sense of right and wrong, her unwillingness to stay silent in the face of inequality. For Crockett, ambition wasn't about climbing ladders for herself. It was about breaking open doors for those told they didn't belong. Her path took her to law, a profession where voices like hers are too often drowned out. And yet, as an attorney, Crockett didn't just survive, she thrived. She built a reputation for being fearless in the courtroom, for taking cases others avoided, for standing shoulder to shoulder with clients who couldn't afford the luxury of polished defense teams. In a system stacked against the marginalized, Crockett became a rare force of balance. She knew the rules, she knew the tactics, and, most importantly, she knew how to weaponize truth against those who tried to hide behind power. That training would later become her armor in politics. By the time she stepped into Congress, Crockett had already learned the rhythm of confrontation: when to hold silence, when to strike with precision, when to let the opposition reveal their own weakness. It was the discipline of an attorney fused with the fire of an advocate, creating a style uniquely her own. That style soon became unmistakable. Crockett's presence in hearings was a study in contrasts. Where others blustered and shouted, she wielded calm like a blade. Her wit was sharp, her questions surgical, her comebacks leaving opponents stumbling. She didn't need volume to dominate a room. Her clarity carried more weight than any raised voice could. Audiences watching her exchanges online felt it instantly. This wasn't a politician rehearsing lines. This was a woman who had spent years sharpening her edge against real resistance, and people noticed. Constituents saw someone unafraid to speak the truth others only whispered. Young Americans saw a reflection of themselves, bold, unapologetic, unwilling to be dismissed. Immigrant families saw in her the validation that the American dream wasn't just for the privileged few. Crockett's rise wasn't meteoric because of luck. It was propelled by the authenticity of her fight. Still, Crockett's greatest strength wasn't only her skill with words. It was her ability to transform attacks into ammunition. Time and again, critics tried to frame her passion as aggression, her clarity as arrogance, her refusal to back down as disrespect. But Crockett had a way of flipping those accusations on their head. She could take an insult and twist it into evidence, take a dismissal and turn it into a spotlight. What others hurled at her as weakness, she recast as proof of her strength. That was her secret weapon, the ability to turn accusations into truth bombs, leaving her opponents exposed by their own hostility. This is the Jasmine Crockett who sat in Judge Howell's courtroom that day. Not just a congresswoman, not just a lawyer, but a woman carrying the weight of her community's hopes, the discipline of her legal training, and the clarity of someone who knew exactly what was at stake. To those watching, she may have looked calm, silent, even restrained as Howell barked her sanction. But behind those steady eyes was a storm, carefully controlled, waiting for the perfect moment to be unleashed. And when Howell moved to strike her, Crockett didn't flinch. She set a trap. 5. Debate escalated at the silence after Howell's declaration hung heavy, like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Then, as if determined to remind the courtroom who held the gavel, Howell's voice sliced through the air once more. This chamber will not be turned into a stage for political grandstanding. You will respect the rules, Representative Crockett, or you will face further consequences. Her gavel struck again, sharp and thunderous, punctuating her words with force. The sound reverberated across the wood-paneled walls, but Crockett remained steady, her gaze locked on Howell. No tremor in her voice, no anxious shifting in her seat, only calm composure. And then, in a measured tone that carried farther than Howell's raised voice, she spoke. With all due respect, Your Honor, I am here not to grandstand, but to defend the truth. And the truth is not out of order. The gallery stirred. Murmurs rippled across the benches. Howell stiffened, clearly unaccustomed to being met with defiance delivered so softly, so surgically. She slammed her gavel once more. You are skating dangerously close to contempt, Representative. Her voice rose, not just in authority but in irritation, a crack in the polished veneer of judicial control. Crockett leaned forward slightly, her words precise, her cadence deliberate. Contempt, she said, is when the truth is denied its place in this chamber. Contempt is when authority is used not to serve justice, but to silence it. Her statement wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Each word landed like a strike, sharper than any gavel. The tension tightened like a noose around the room. Howell's lips pressed into a thin line. She snapped back. "You are testing the patience of this court." But the more she raised her voice, the more obvious the contrast became. Howell, rattled, resorting to volume and intimidation. Crockett, unshaken, weaving law and principle into every calm rebuttal. It was a duel of tones. Anger versus composure, command versus conviction. And as the exchange stretched on, it was clear to everyone watching that Howell's authority, once absolute, was beginning to fray. Each gavel strike sounded less like control and more like desperation. Reporters scribbled frantically, sensing history unfolding. Observers in the gallery leaned forward, caught between disbelief and awe. Every pause, every measured breath from Crockett seemed to grow heavier, more dangerous for Howell. The representative was building something, layer by layer, word by word, while Howell was merely reacting, swinging wildly with the blunt instrument of authority. Why now? The balance in the room had shifted. The judge's voice cracked with strain. Crockett's words rang with certainty. What began as an attempt to silence had transformed into a standoff, and though Howell held the gavel, it was clear she was losing control of the narrative. The clash built to a crescendo. Howell slammed the gavel again, her voice nearly breaking. "This is not a debate," she snapped. But even as the sound echoed, her command rang hollow. Because everyone in that courtroom, from the reporters in the back row to the lawyers at their tables, knew exactly what was happening. It was a debate, and Crockett was winning it. The judge thought she had silenced her. Instead, Crockett was about to unleash the words that flipped the entire courtroom. 6. The mic drop counterattacked. The gavel's echo had barely faded when Crockett leaned back in her chair, her composure unbroken, her eyes fixed firmly on Judge Howell. The tension in the room was suffocating. Every journalist, every attorney, every spectator could feel it, the sense that something was about to snap, that the standoff was reaching its breaking point. And then Crockett spoke. Not with anger, not with panic, but with a calm so deliberate it demanded attention. "Your Honor," she began, her tone steady, "you may control this gavel, but you don't control the truth." The words landed like a thunderclap. For a moment, the room went utterly still. No shuffling of papers, no murmurs from the gallery. Only the sound of pens scratching furiously as reporters captured the line they knew would be replayed across the nation. Lawyers leaned toward each other, whispering in disbelief. A few suppressed smiles flickered on faces that had been frozen with tension just moments earlier. That Howell's eyes narrowed. The robe, the bench, the authority of her position, none of it shielded her from the precision of Crockett's statement. Because in that single line, Crockett had reframed the entire exchange. This wasn't about courtroom order. This wasn't about sanctions. It was about the universal principle that authority cannot silence truth. She paused, letting the silence stretch, giving her words time to sink into the marrow of everyone present. Then she continued, her voice calm but resolute. "For years, too many voices have been stifled in rooms just like this one. Too many people told to wait their turn, to hold their tongue, to sit quietly while decisions are made about their lives. That may be order, but it is not justice." The judge shifted in her seat. Another crack in her control. Crockett's words weren't defiance for its own sake. They were deliberate, constructed like the arguments of an attorney who had spent her career dismantling opponents piece by piece. She went on. "The sanction you threaten, Your Honor, is not a mark on me. It is a mark on the system. Because what you are punishing is not disorder. What you are punishing is dissent. And dissent, in this country, is not a crime. It is a duty." A murmur rolled through the gallery, louder now, impossible to contain. Reporters scribbled with frantic energy, knowing they were capturing history in real time. The gavel came down again, but this time its sound was weaker, hollow, almost drowned out by the weight of Crockett's words. She leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Howell's. "I did not come here to be disrespectful. I came here because the people I represent expect me to defend the truth, even when it is inconvenient, even when it makes those in power uncomfortable. You can sanction me, you can gavel me, but you cannot erase the facts. You cannot silence the truth." The room held its breath. Even those who had smirked earlier, hoping to see Crockett humiliated, now sat rigid, watching the balance of power invert before their eyes. And Crockett wasn't finished. She let the pause linger, then delivered the line that would ricochet far beyond those walls. History doesn't remember the gavel. It remembers the voices that dared to speak when silence was demanded. Howell blinked, visibly rattled. The veneer of untouchable authority was slipping. Her attempts at intimidation had collided with Crockett's unyielding calm, and for the first time in that proceeding, it was the judge who looked cornered. Reaction shots painted the scene in real time. Attorneys trading stunned glances, reporters shaking their heads in disbelief at what they were witnessing, young spectators in the gallery clutching their phones, already imagining how this moment would explode across social media. Hashtags were practically writing themselves. And through it all, Crockett remained unshaken. Each phrase she delivered carried the precision of a scalpel, cutting away the pretense of authority until all that remained was the raw imbalance of power on display. Howell, who had entered the confrontation with the confidence of someone used to winning, now looked smaller, her gavel strikes reduced to hollow echoes. Crockett's voice softened, but the gentleness made it more piercing. I have sat across from prosecutors who believed they could intimidate me. I have argued before judges who believed they could diminish me. And in every case, I carried the same conviction. The truth will outlast them all. It will outlast me, it will outlast you, and it will outlast this moment. For the first time, Howell's hand trembled as she adjusted her papers. The mighty arbiter of order was suddenly on defense, and everyone could see it. The authority she wielded so confidently at the start of the hearing now looked fragile, brittle, vulnerable. Crockett leaned back, her statement complete, her silence once again louder than any outburst could ever be. The courtroom felt transformed, as though the gravitational center of the room had shifted. Authority no longer sat behind the bench. It radiated from the woman who had dared to challenge it. The gavel came down again, one final attempt to reassert control. But this time, it wasn't Howell's authority that defined the moment. It was the realization shared by everyone present that the courtroom had just witnessed a reversal, a power shift, a mic drop that could not be taken back. And when the gavel struck again, the room realized nothing would ever be the same. 7. The aftermath shockwaves. At the moment Crockett's words left her lips, the courtroom didn't just exhale. It erupted in a wave of disbelief and awe. Outside, the ripple spread like wildfire. Within minutes, footage of the exchange was circulating on every major news outlet, shared and reshared across social media platforms. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag Crockett stands. Hashtag truth over gavel. Hashtag courtroom hero. Millions of viewers, some glued to live streams, others catching clips later, watched in stunned admiration as a young representative challenged one of the most respected judges in the nation, and won, at least in narrative. Commentators scrambled to process what had just occurred. Pundits who had initially framed Crockett as in hot water now found themselves revising their scripts in real time. Analysts debated her tactics, her poise, her legal acumen, while political talk shows replayed clips with slow-motion emphasis on each carefully chosen word. The courtroom that had once seemed like a contained battleground had become a national stage. And on that stage, Crockett emerged not just unscathed, but triumphant. Meanwhile, Judge Howell's image in the media began to shift. Headlines that once praised her strict control were now tinged with criticism. Judge oversteps in confrontation with rising Congresswoman. Power versus principle. Did the bench go too far? The narrative pivoted, portraying Howell less as a neutral arbiter and more as a figure attempting to wield authority as a weapon. The visual of the gavel striking repeatedly became a symbol of overreach, a cautionary tale of when control is mistaken for justice. Crockett, on the other hand, became an instant symbol of resilience and courage. Social media audiences, particularly young voters and marginalized communities, latched onto her performance with visceral intensity. Tweets poured in. Finally, someone stood up to authority. Crockett just redefined what it means to fight for truth. This is why representation matters. Millions of viewers found themselves echoing her courage, seeing in her victory a reflection of their own desire to challenge systems that tried to silence them. The validation went deeper than applause. Crockett's composure, Her strategic dismantling of the Sanction attempt offered a blueprint for confronting injustice without losing one's dignity. Audiences could feel it in real time. Power can be questioned. Authority can be confronted. Standing firm, even in the face of intimidation, isn't reckless, it's necessary. And that realization hit hardest for communities long accustomed to being told they must defer, accept, and remain quiet. For them, Crockett's stand wasn't just inspiring. It was liberating. Media commentators highlighted the contrast repeatedly. Howell, the embodiment of the establishment's control, versus Crockett, the fearless advocate unafraid to speak truth to power. Social media amplified the framing further, mixing clips with commentary, reaction videos, and memes that spread like wildfire. Each iteration reinforced the emotional resonance of Crockett's performance: measured, composed, righteous, and unwavering. She wasn't just defending herself. She was defending the principle that no one, even a judge, can suppress the truth without consequence. Yet, even with the nation watching, the tension remained. Millions had cheered, yes, but the story wasn't over. The courtroom's echoes, the viral videos, the praise, it was all part of a larger narrative just beginning to unfold. Viewers were left with a powerful takeaway. The system is not invincible, and courage can redefine what authority looks like when it is challenged responsibly. But the most important truth of all lingered in the air. Crockett wasn't done. This wasn't simply a viral moment, a political soundbite, or a fleeting instance of courtroom drama. She had set the stage for something larger, something that would resonate far beyond the walls of that chamber. Crockett wasn't done. She turned the moment into a lesson for every American watching. 8. Resolution. As the echoes of the gavel faded and Howell's attempts at authority waned, Crockett leaned forward, her voice steady, her words deliberate. She reframed the entire ordeal, not as a personal victory, not as a defiance of a judge, but as a lesson far larger than herself. This moment, she began, is not about me. It is about every voice that has been told to stay silent, every truth that has been dismissed, and every person who has been told their dignity can be ignored. In that simple statement, Crockett transformed what could have been a punitive spectacle into a universal message. The sanction that Howell sought to impose was meant to intimidate, to assert control, to remind the world of who held power. But Crockett reframed it. It became a testament to resilience, to the idea that courage cannot be sanctioned, and that truth, when spoken with clarity and conviction, cannot be suppressed. Every viewer watching could see themselves in that moment. The young activist in a dorm room, the immigrant mother navigating a world stacked against her, the student questioning authority for the first time. Crockett's stand was a mirror, reflecting back the dignity of anyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of someone wielding institutional weight. And in that reflection, there was hope, a sense that standing firm, even when challenged by figures of authority, was not only possible but necessary. Crockett's words continued to resonate, rising like a crescendo in the courtroom and in the minds of those watching nationwide. In that courtroom, she said, I reminded America that truth is not on trial. Justice is not a weapon to be wielded selectively, and dignity is not negotiable. Each phrase hit like a bell, marking the turning point where narrative shifted from conflict to moral clarity. What had started as a clash between a congresswoman and a judge had become a story about principles, about the courage to speak out, and about the enduring power of integrity over intimidation. Meanwhile, Howell's attempts to assert dominance had backfired spectacularly. Her authority, once unquestioned, now appeared rigid and brittle. The courtroom drama had exposed the vulnerability beneath the robe, the limits of power when confronted with reasoned courage. In this reversal, the villain's downfall became more than personal. It was symbolic. It was a reminder that authority untempered by fairness and respect can falter, and that courage, when wielded wisely, can illuminate the cracks in even the most formidable walls. By the time Crockett concluded, the room was transformed. Observers no longer saw a simple procedural dispute. They witnessed a profound affirmation of justice. Every pause, every measured statement, every calm yet cutting word had reinforced a truth that transcended the courtroom: that courage, clarity, and principle are forces that can outlast intimidation. And as the murmurs settled, As the reporters captured every moment for the world to see, one fact became undeniable. This was no longer just a legal proceeding. It was a lesson, a moral story, a challenge to every viewer to stand firm in their own lives. And that's why this wasn't just a courtroom skirmish. It was a message to a nation. 9. Outro. Judge Beryl Howell tried to sanction Jasmine Crockett, but it backfired in the most stunning way. What began as an attempt to assert control, to remind a rising representative of her place, instead became a stage for courage, clarity, and the power of speaking truth to authority. Crockett's measured calm, her unwavering conviction, and her ability to dismantle intimidation with reason and principle left a courtroom and a nation stunned. The emotional payoff was immediate and profound. Millions watching across the country saw more than a legal battle. They witnessed justice triumph over arrogance, dignity rise above intimidation, and courage outshine fear. Crockett's stand wasn't just about winning a debate in a courtroom. It was about proving that voices, even against overwhelming authority, can make an impact. It was a reminder that no system, no matter how imposing, can silence those who speak with clarity, purpose, and integrity. And that is where the power of this moment extends beyond the chamber walls. It reaches every person who has ever been told to stay quiet, every community whose concerns are dismissed, every individual seeking the strength to stand firm in the face of authority. Crockett's victory is validation. You can challenge power, you can protect your truth, and you can emerge with dignity intact. If you believe voices like Crockett's matter, share this story, subscribe, and stand with those who won't be silenced. Let her courage inspire you to hold your own ground, to speak your truth, and to recognize that integrity and bravery will always outlast fear and intimidation. Because history isn't written by those who held the gavel. It's written by those who spoke truth to it.